The bride arrived with torn shoes. The cowboy looked down and said, "Then you've brought everything that matters." Dry Hollow, Montana, autumn, 1878. The train let out a long, groaning whistle as it pulled into the dusty station of Dry Hollow. Iron wheels screeched against the track, and a cloud of steam hissed skyward, curling into the pale, windless afternoon. The town was small, wooden storefronts, a few wagons, and a church steeple crooked in the distance. But it held its breath as the eastbound train rolled in. A girl stepped down from the third car. She was young, barely 18. Her dress was faded, patched at the back with mismatched fabric, and hung loose on a frame too thin from hunger and travel. She wore shoes so worn the leather had split, revealing bruised purple toes beneath the dust. One hand clutched a cracked wooden suitcase. In the other, she gripped an old yellowed letter, folded and refolded until the paper softened like cloth. She paused at the edge of the platform, scanning the crowd with hopeful eyes. Her lips trembled into a smile. She was afraid, yes, but also expectant, her heart pounding with the promise of a new life. She had come all this way for him. At the far end of the platform stood a man, tall, polished, broad in the shoulders, with slicked hair and spotless boots. He wore a tailored vest and held a bouquet of stiff white lilies in one gloved hand. Henry Foster, her pen pal, her future. His eyes locked on her. For a moment, he froze. Then his face hardened. He saw the threadbare dress, the calloused hands, the dirt-streaked cheeks, the bruised feet, the trembling suitcase. Hope drained from his eyes like water spilled from a broken cup. "Henry," she called, voice barely louder than the breeze. He turned his head away. Without a word, without a glance back, he stepped backward, melted into the murmuring crowd, and disappeared down the street. Gasps and whispers rose from onlookers. "Is that the letter girl?" someone muttered. "She looks like a beggar," said another. Lila Mae Carter stood alone. Her smile faded, her lips paled. Then, slowly, she sank to the wooden planks of the platform, knees buckling beneath her. Her suitcase tipped and fell open. Inside, a neatly folded dress, a bar of soap, a worn-out Bible, and 2 brass buttons. Blood seeped from her heels where the shoes had cut her. Still, she did not cry. She stared out at nothing, letter clutched so tightly in her hand it began to tear. Somewhere in the crowd, someone had stopped moving. A young cowboy leaned against a wooden post near the freight cart, dust on his sleeves. Straw-colored hair curled at his collar. A lasso hung at his belt, and he held a leather saddle under one arm. Wyatt Granger. He had seen this before. His mother had once waited in a white dress on the church steps of Dry Hollow. But no one ever came. He stepped forward, approached her quietly, slowly, as if nearing a spooked animal. He knelt down beside her and set a wooden canteen on the ground. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She blinked. Her voice was small. "Lila Mae Carter." He watched her for a moment, not in pity, not in judgment, but with something deeper, something like reverence. Then he rose. Not far off, Henry Foster lingered at the edge of the alley, watching from behind a barrel. Wyatt saw him. He walked over. "You Henry Foster?" Henry flinched. "Yes." Wyatt's voice was steady. "I used to think I was the one not good enough. But today, I see who really is not." Henry said nothing. Wyatt turned on his heel and returned to her. He extended a hand, eyes steady and sure. "Come with me," he said. "I don't have much, but I've got land, horses, and a place for someone brave like you." She stared at his hand, then down at her ruined shoes. Her heart raced, her shame still burned. But so did something else, a flicker of warmth, a spark of safety. She did not move. So, Wyatt crouched again, dipped his hat, and said softly, "You've brought everything that matters." And for the first time since stepping off that train, Lila Mae Carter let herself breathe. The horse moved at a gentle pace along the dirt road that wound through the heart of Dry Hollow. The town's eyes followed them, not out of malice, but with a quiet, judgmental curiosity. Whispers lingered in the air like the dust kicked up beneath the hooves. Lila sat behind Wyatt on the saddle, her arms lightly wrapped around his waist. She did not know if it was from fear or necessity, but her fingers clung to the worn leather of the saddle horn, as if letting go might send her flying into some great unknown. Her heart thudded wildly inside her chest. She kept her gaze low, avoiding the storefronts and the faces she knew were watching. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "You don't even know who I am. Why would you help me?" Wyatt didn't turn his head. His voice was quiet but firm. "I know what a broken heart looks like," he said, "and I know a man who leaves a woman like that isn't fit to look her in the eyes again." Lila didn't answer, but her grip loosened slightly. They rode past the last house on the edge of town and into open country, miles of dry prairie grass swaying in the breeze. The sun had begun its descent, casting long, golden beams across the land. After a while, Wyatt slowed the horse and guided it down a narrow path through a grove of cottonwoods. At the edge of the trees, a small stream gurgled gently over smooth stones. He stopped. "Let's rest a moment," he said. He dismounted with ease, then turned to help her down. She hesitated before taking his hand, her body stiff with uncertainty. When her feet touched the ground, she winced. Wyatt looked down. Her shoes had split almost entirely open now, and dark blotches of blood had soaked into the sides. He said nothing. He reached for the saddlebag and pulled out a small metal kettle. From it, he poured warm water into a tin basin. Without asking, he knelt before her. Carefully, he eased the ruined shoes from her feet. Lila's breath hitched, but she didn't pull away. Her skin was torn, raw at the heels and blistered at the toes. A lesser man might have winced or recoiled. Wyatt didn't. He dipped a cloth into the warm water, wrung it out, and began to clean the wounds. His touch was gentle, methodical, every motion unspoken but full of meaning. She stared down at him, unable to understand why this stranger, this cowboy with a weathered face and calloused hands, was treating her as if she mattered. Tears welled in her eyes before she even realized they were there. Then they fell, slow, steady drops that slid down her cheeks without sound. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I'm tired." Wyatt didn't look up. "You don't need to be sorry." When he was done, he helped her sit beneath a cottonwood tree. He offered her a piece of jerky and a swallow from his canteen. She took both, grateful in a way that went deeper than food or water. They sat in silence for several minutes, the stream murmuring beside them, the sky deepening to orange and lavender. Finally, Wyatt stood, brushed the dirt from his jeans, and held out a hand. "Let's go," he said. "We'll be home before dark." Lila took his hand. The final stretch of their ride was quieter, but not empty. Something had shifted, barely, but enough to notice. Her hands rested against his back, not out of fear now, but with cautious trust. As they crested a small ridge, the land opened before them. A valley bathed in golden light stretched out below. A modest wooden cabin stood in its heart, chimney puffing thin smoke into the sky. Beside it was a small barn, a grazing horse, a clothesline swaying gently in the wind. It was not much, but it was real. It was peaceful, and it was his. Wyatt looked back over his shoulder and caught her eye. "That's home," he said. Lila didn't speak, but for the first time in days, maybe weeks, her shoulders dropped, and she exhaled like someone setting down a heavy burden. It was not the future she'd dreamed of, but perhaps it was the one she needed. Mornings came early at the ranch, but Lila no longer dreaded them. She woke to the sound of birds and the smell of wood smoke. She made coffee while Wyatt saddled the mare. He never asked her to do chores, but she did them anyway. She swept the floors, folded blankets, peeled potatoes with careful fingers that had once only clutched letters and dreams. She didn't know much, but she learned quickly. Wyatt taught her how to ride. The first few lessons were rough. She gripped the saddle horn too tightly, leaned too far forward, but he was patient. He let her fall once, just enough to laugh at herself, then helped her back up without a word. She noticed he never hovered, never made her feel small for not knowing. He just let her try, and fail, and try again, until she no longer felt like a burden. One evening, after bringing in firewood, they sat together by the shed, neither of them speaking. The day's sun had dipped low, turning the sky soft and orange. Wyatt tossed a rope coil to the ground and said, almost too casually, "My mama came out here when she was younger than you." Lila turned to him, hands still wrapped around a tin mug of warm milk. "She was married to a man who drank more than he plowed. He left not long after I was born." He reached down, picked up a handful of dirt, let it fall between his fingers. "She raised me alone, did laundry for the miners, took in sewing, cleaned the schoolhouse. Folks called her strong, but they never offered to help." He paused, gaze far off. "She died with nothing but a wooden cross and a pair of shoes that barely stayed on her feet." Then he looked at her. "Mama wore shoes like yours, worn down, split at the heel, but she always walked proud." Lila blinked, not from sadness, but from the weight of what he'd just shared. She whispered, "I think maybe that's the bravest kind of woman." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. A few days later, he asked her to come around back. Behind the cabin, beyond the corral, was a small strip of land fenced with worn timber. Lila followed as Wyatt opened the gate and walked to the far end. There, planted in uneven rows, were wildflowers, growing in the dry soil like they didn't know they shouldn't. "I started these last year," he said, brushing his hand over the petals. "My mama never had a grave, just a field stone. Thought this might be better." Lila knelt beside one of the blooms. The colors were vivid, orange, deep red, pale purple, and the leaves trembled in the light wind. "She'd like this," Lila said. "That's why I planted them. For women who came through fire and didn't turn to ash." She touched one flower gently, the way she imagined someone would touch memory if it had shape. "I came from ashes," she murmured. "I still smell the smoke sometimes." Wyatt didn't say anything, just knelt beside her. His hand brushed hers as he reached for a flower, and neither of them pulled away. Later that week, it rained hard. They had been out checking the fence line when the storm rolled over the hills. Thunder cracked behind them, and Wyatt grabbed her hand without thinking. They raced the rain back toward the barn, soaked by the time they ducked under the awning. Both breathless, dripping, laughing. She wiped wet hair from her face. He pushed his hat back. Their eyes met. A moment passed. One heartbeat, maybe two, but it held more than some kisses do. He reached toward her, as if to touch her cheek, then stopped. Not out of doubt, but respect. Lila saw it in the way his hand hovered, then dropped. She didn't move, didn't need to. Some things didn't require a name to be known. Inside, she changed into dry clothes. He lit the fire. And when she brought him a mug of coffee, their fingers touched again, longer this time. Still, no words, only warmth. And the quiet certainty that something had started, and neither of them needed to rush it. It had been nearly 3 weeks since Lila arrived at Wyatt's ranch, and for the first time in years, peace no longer felt like a stranger. But peace, as she would learn, rarely lingers long on the frontier. The first sign came as dust, rising fast from the edge of the valley road. Wyatt stood in the corral, brushing down the roan mare, when he noticed it, his brow furrowed. Lila stepped out of the cabin, wiping flour from her hands. "You expecting anyone?" she asked. "No," Wyatt said, setting the brush down. 3 riders crested the ridge and approached the cabin. The lead man wore a black vest and gloves too fine for work. Behind him were 2 others, one lanky, one built like a saloon bouncer. And Lila recognized the one in front instantly. Henry Foster. Her blood ran cold. The horses stopped a few yards from the porch. Henry dismounted like a man stepping into a courtroom. "Well," he said, removing his gloves, "this is where you ended up." Lila didn't answer. Henry looked around, unimpressed. "Charming little setup. Bit less than what I pictured when you wrote me those letters." Wyatt stepped forward, standing between Henry and the cabin. "You came a long way just to insult a woman you already threw away," he said evenly. Henry scoffed. "I came to take back what's mine." Wyatt's eyes narrowed. "She's not yours." "She was supposed to be. Promises were made." Henry turned toward Lila, voice rising. "You think I'd let you humiliate me in front of this whole town? Run off with some dirt farmer?" "You left her," Wyatt said, stepping closer. Henry's lip curled. "She made a fool of me." "No," Wyatt growled. "You did that all by yourself." From the edge of the trees, 2 townsfolk watched on horseback. Word was already spreading. Dry Hollow had always been a town quick to whisper. "Con man Foster wants his bride back," someone would say. "She ran off with the cowboy," another would reply. Lila stepped out from the porch, slowly but with purpose. Henry's eyes snapped to her. "You," he spat, "you were nothing when I found you. A charity case. And now look at you, living like a squatter in the hills. That little stunt at the station? That was a knife in my back." Lila's voice was calm. "You never knew me." "I knew enough," Henry shouted. "You're a beggar girl with good handwriting. And you've smeared my name across this God-forsaken town." Wyatt moved without warning, stepping right in front of him. His voice dropped to a deadly calm. "The woman you're talking about walked across 3 states with nothing but faith. She survived things you wouldn't last a day in, and she is here, standing, because of her own strength, not because of you. Not because of me, but because she is braver than any man here today." Henry laughed, bitter and cold, and then he swung. The punch landed hard against Wyatt's jaw, sending him back a step. Wyatt didn't hit back. Another punch came, this one to the ribs. Wyatt grunted but held his ground, fists still lowered. "Hit me," Henry snarled. "Come on, hit me." But Wyatt didn't move. "Coward," Henry hissed. Then came a voice neither man expected. "Enough." Lila stepped down from the porch, eyes blazing, fists clenched at her sides. She walked up between them, standing beside Wyatt with her chin high. "I am not a thing," she said, "not a horse, not a house to be repossessed. I am not yours." Henry's rage faltered. "You owe me." "I owe you nothing." She turned to Wyatt. "I will not let you get hurt for me." Wyatt looked at her, blood trickling from his lip. "You didn't. I chose to stand." Henry spat on the ground, glaring at both of them. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "Leave," Wyatt said, his voice sharp now. Henry hesitated, then mounted his horse with a bitter scowl. The 2 men with him said nothing. They turned and rode off without a word. When the dust settled, Lila turned to Wyatt. He staggered slightly. She caught his arm. "You need to sit down," she said. "I'm all right." "You're bleeding." "Just a little." But she saw it, saw the bruise darkening beneath his eye, the cut at his lip, the way he winced when he breathed. Guilt rose inside her like bile. "I brought trouble to your door," she whispered. "No," he said gently. "Trouble knocked. You opened the door to something else entirely." The cabin was still in the early morning light. A breeze swept through the open window, rustling the curtain just enough to disturb the quiet. On the table lay a letter, folded once, weighed down by a small stone. Wyatt entered the room and saw it. He knew before he read it. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the page. "Wyatt, you gave me shelter when I had none, and kindness when I had long stopped expecting it. But I see now what follows me, the rumors, the fists, the history that does not die. I came here with torn shoes, and now I fear I might leave your heart in the same condition. I will not stay to see that happen. Please forgive me. Lila." He stood in silence, eyes locked on the words. Then he reached for his coat. Lila didn't go far. She had walked the old trail east of the valley, past the cottonwoods, to the edge of town. There, hidden between overgrowth and time, stood a weather-worn chapel, roof sagging, paint peeled, but cross still firm atop the steeple. Inside, sunlight streamed through broken panes, casting fractured light across pews and dust. She sat near the altar, clutching her bag, unsure what she was waiting for. Maybe peace, maybe punishment. She didn't hear Wyatt approach. He stepped inside quietly, boots echoing against the wood floor. Lila turned, startled, then looked down. "I didn't mean for you to follow. I didn't mean to let you go." She blinked, already ashamed. "I thought if I left fast enough, it would hurt less." Wyatt walked to the center aisle, stopping just before her. "If you're going to leave," he said, voice low, "then don't take your shoes." She looked up, confused. He stepped closer. "Leave them here. So you'll remember, it was with those torn shoes you walked into my life. They brought more than you'll ever know." Tears welled in her eyes. "You're not afraid?" she asked softly. "Every damn day," he answered. "But not of you." He sat beside her on the pew. "I'm afraid of never seeing who you'll become. You've survived the fire. What's left now is yours to build." She stared at her hands. "They said I was too poor, too broken." "They were wrong," he said. Silence stretched between them, gentle this time. Lila reached into her bag and pulled out the letter she had written. Slowly, she tore it in half, then in quarters, then smaller, until only dust-like pieces remained in her palm. She let them fall to the floor. "I don't want to run," she said. "Then don't." He reached out, took her hand. "I never asked you to stay because I needed saving," he said. "I asked because I saw something worth walking beside." She looked at him then, truly looked, and in his eyes there was no pity, no possession, only belief. They returned to the ranch as the sun was beginning its quiet descent behind the hills. The wind smelled like rain and lavender. For the first time, the land felt less like a place she had stumbled into, and more like a place she could grow roots. Lila didn't unpack that night. Instead, she went to the storage shed behind the barn and dug through old crates until she found what she was looking for, a roll of stiff, weather-worn cowhide, cracked along the edges, but still strong at the center. She brought it inside and laid it out on the kitchen table. For hours, she worked, cutting, measuring, stitching by lantern light. Her fingers ached, and more than once, she pricked herself, but she didn't stop. The rhythm of the needle through the hide was a kind of prayer, a way to stitch herself back together. She hummed softly, an old tune her mother used to sing while mending things they could never afford to replace. Now, with every stitch, she wasn't just repairing old leather. She was remaking something she thought she'd lost: dignity. By dawn, they were finished. Her first real pair of shoes, rough, uneven, imperfect. But hers. When Wyatt saw them, he didn't say a word. He simply nodded once and smiled. The kind of smile that didn't need explanation. One that held pride, and something gentler, something sacred. In the days that followed, things began to change. Not all at once, but in ways that mattered. They repaired the north fence, weather-worn and leaning, built a second stall for the mare. Wyatt brought home 2 goats and a clutch of young chickens, joking that he'd always wanted a noisy little army to wake him before sunrise. Lila learned to milk, to shear, to gather eggs without cracking them. She even patched Wyatt's old shirts, adding tiny, careful embroidery only she would notice. She laughed more, spoke more, ate better, slept deeper. Her eyes no longer darted to the door at every sound. Her shoulders stopped curling inward. Slowly, surely, she began to belong. One afternoon, while hanging laundry beneath the wide blue sky, she heard hammering near the front of the cabin. She walked around the corner and stopped short. Wyatt was driving a nail into a wide cedar plank, freshly carved and sanded smooth. His brow was furrowed in concentration, tongue poking slightly from the corner of his mouth as he worked. He stepped back to admire it, then noticed her watching. The sign read, "Ashes and Wildflowers, a place for the brave." Lila brought her hand to her mouth, eyes brimming. "Did you make that for me?" He shrugged, but his voice was thick. "For us." She walked over, touching the letters one by one, tracing the grooves like scripture. "I never thought I'd belong anywhere." "You do now," he said. She looked up at him, smiled through tears. And for the first time in her life, tears meant something good. The sun rose golden over Dry Hollow the morning of the wedding. The sky was clear, painted soft with pinks and yellows. Behind the cabin, where weeds once grew wild, Wyatt and Lila, along with a few good-hearted neighbors, had cleared the land and laid out wooden benches made from split logs. There was no chapel, no altar, no white linen or silver goblets. But there were wildflowers, and laughter, and the scent of fresh bread rising from the Dutch oven near the fire pit. Chickens wandered near the fence line, curious and clucking. A cow lowed lazily in the distance, as if offering her blessing. Lila stood inside the cabin, tying the last knot of her handmade dress. It was simple, stitched from scraps Wyatt had brought her over the past months. A piece of flannel from his old shirt, some faded linen from an old grain sack, the hem of a curtain once hanging in the barn window. She'd sewn it mostly by moonlight, dreaming of this day without daring to speak of it aloud. Somehow, when sewn together, it looked like it was always meant to be worn on this day. Outside, Wyatt waited. He wore his cleanest shirt, ironed stiff along the collar, and his Sunday boots freshly brushed. A daisy was tucked behind one ear, placed there by a neighbor's child who had insisted he look like a groom. And he did. Not in finery, but in quiet, certain joy. When Lila stepped into the clearing, every head turned. The guests, just a handful of ranchers, their wives, and 2 schoolteachers from town, stood in silence, as if watching something sacred. The air itself felt reverent. She walked barefoot, her new shoes in her hand, feeling the cool earth beneath her feet. Every step reminded her of where she came from and how far she'd come. When she reached Wyatt, he took her hands. They faced each other in the middle of the grass, with only the land and sky and wind as witnesses. Wyatt cleared his throat. "You came to me with torn shoes," he said, voice steady, "but you brought something no one can buy, courage. And I swear to you, Lila Mae Carter, I will never let you walk alone again." Lila's eyes shone, her voice trembling but sure. "You never saw me as a burden," she said. "You saw me as someone worth loving. And I choose you, not just today, but every day, every year, for the rest of my life." A breath of wind stirred the grass, carrying their words into the hills. Then came the soft strains of harmonica, "Home on the Range," played slow and gentle by old Mr. Finch, who sat near the cook fire with tears in his eyes and his hat pressed to his chest. Lila and Wyatt took each other by the hands and danced. No choreography, no music beyond the tune and the breeze and the beating of two calm hearts. They spun once, then again, laughing, crying. The sky burned gold above them. The wild flowers swayed like they, too, were dancing. And in that quiet corner of the world, love planted its roots. 2 years later, the ranch at Ashes and Wildflowers bloomed with a quiet kind of joy. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the cabin's cedar roof. Chickens pecked lazily at the dry earth, and the bleating of goats echoed faintly from the pasture. A breeze rustled the curtains through the open kitchen window. Inside, Lila moved gently between the counter and the stove, a sling wrapped around her shoulders. In it, a baby girl, barely a year old, slept with her cheek pressed to her mother's collarbone. She had Wyatt's gray eyes and Lila's wild brown curls. Lila kneaded dough with one hand, humming softly as the little one stirred. She sprinkled flour on the table and smiled to herself, her heart full with things no one else could see. Outside, Wyatt was mending the southern fence, sleeves rolled to his elbows. Beside him, 2 young ranch hands worked under his steady guidance. He paused now and then, glancing back toward the cabin. The sight of his wife and child moving within the doorway never failed to still something deep inside him. Over the cabin's door hung the old wooden sign, carved and sanded with care. Ashes and Wildflowers, established by love, grown by grace. Next to it, nailed just beneath the window, were 2 small pairs of shoes. One was a tiny set of hand-stitched leather boots, the baby's first. The other, older, worn, and mended, belonged to a girl who had once stepped off a train with nothing but a suitcase and a letter. Footsteps stirred the gravel path. A wagon rolled by on the main trail, slowing slightly. From the back, a young woman climbed down, no more than 17, thin and wide-eyed. Her dress was patched, her hair pulled back too tightly, and in her hand she clutched a faded envelope. She looked toward the cabin, unsure. Lila stepped onto the porch, brushing her hands on her apron. The baby cooed softly against her chest. The girl opened her mouth to speak, but Lila beat her to it. "If you've got the courage to come this far," she said gently, "then you already have everything you need." The girl blinked, lips parting in surprise. From inside the doorway, Wyatt appeared, lifting the baby into his arms. He gave the girl a quiet nod. "We've got room for brave ones," he said. The girl smiled, just barely, but it was enough. The wind danced across the fields, bending the tall grass like waves. The flowers behind the cabin, wild and stubborn, swayed as if listening. And inside the walls of a once-forgotten home, love had taken root. In a place where no one believed love could grow, 2 people who had survived the fire planted something small. And from the ashes rose a home, rose hope, rose a family. And so, in the quiet heart of Montana, where dust once settled on broken promises, love found its voice. Not in grand gestures or riches, but in torn shoes, stitched hope, and the hands of 2 souls brave enough to choose each other, every single day. If this story touched your heart, go ahead and hit that like button to let us know. And if you're drawn to timeless tales of courage, sacrifice, and love that blooms where no one thought it could, then subscribe to Wild West Love Stories and ring that bell to never miss the next unforgettable journey. Because out here, where bullets missed but hearts didn't. Every story leaves behind the echo of something real.